physical and chemical change. I'll make this lesson very easy. Click the subscribe button and get access unique lesson. List the change that you observe in your daily life. Here are some examples. Any types of sport you did everywhere, every time. And any experiment you did in your laboratory are examples that we observe in our daily lives. Growth of plants, also another example that we observe in our daily lives. Growth of animals, any types of animals are example of change we observe in our daily life. Day and night, which is happen due to the rotation of the earth. Summer and winter also happen due to the rotation of the earth, are change we observe in our daily life. Rises and sets of sun are happen due to the rotation of the earth, is example of change in our daily lives we observe. Burning, photosynthesis, digestion, respiration, reproductions are some example we observe in our daily lives for change. Baking of cake and cooking of any types of food are example we observe in our daily lives. Roasting of coffee is another example that we observe in our daily life. Melting and freezing are example of change we observe in our daily lives. Evaporation and condensation are examples that happen in our surrounding for change. Boiling, sleeping and being awake, sublimation are some examples that we observe in our daily life for change. Let us define change. Change is a natural law. Means that no one stop it, no one avoid it. It exists forever. Nothing is permanent except the change itself. Now we have two types of change. The one is physical change and the second one is chemical change. Now let us discuss what is physical change. 1. No new substances formed during a physical change. No new properties formed during a physical change. No composition change during a physical change. It only involves state change. Again, there is size change, shape change. The change is easily reversible. Now let us come to chemical change. During chemical change, there is formation of new substance, and again there is formation of new property, and there is composition of change. Again, the energy changes happen during chemical change, and the change is difficult to reverse. Now let us give example for physical change and chemical change. Sport, example for physical change. Growth of animals, chemical change. Growth of plant, chemical change. Day and night, not chemical change, not physical change. Summer and winter, not chemical change, not physical change. Rise of not chemical change, not physical change. Burning, chemical change, example of chemical change. Digestion, example of chemical change. Respiration, example of chemical change. Reproduction, example of chemical change. Baking of cake, example of chemical change. Cooking of food, example of chemical change. Roasting of coffee, example of chemical change. Melting and freezing, both are physical change. Evaporation and condensation, both are physical change. Boiling, physical change. Not chemical change, not physical change. Physical change. Now let us define a chemical change occurs due to chemical reaction between substance. Here are examples. Hydrogen molecule react with oxygen molecule to produce water. Water is a product. Again, it is a new substance that's formed from hydrogen molecule and oxygen molecule. Therefore, the properties of water are different from those of hydrogen and oxygen. Therefore, it is an example of chemical change. Now let us come to the second example. Sodium hydroxide react with hydrochloric acid to produce sodium chloride and waters. Look, the product here is sodium chloride and water that has different from the reactant, and the product is new substance. It has a new property, therefore it's a chemical change. This one is reactant and water is product. As I told you, water has the property of waters differ from those of the reactant. Again, the reactant has different property from the product. A chemical change is a chemical reaction. Again, a chemical reaction is a chemical change. Let me repeat this important concept. A chemical change is a chemical reaction, and a chemical reaction is a chemical change. Now, let us define a chemical reaction. A chemical reaction is the process in which reactants converted into product, as we have seen above. Now let us see what is meant by a chemical equation. Here is we have different example. Hydrogen burns with oxygen to form waters. This is a chemical reaction which is stated in word. Now, hydrogen, H2O, is the symbol of the formula of hydrogen molecule, react with O2, which is the formula of oxygen molecule, to produce waters. This is a chemical equation because it's represented by symbols and formula. Now come to the second example. Calcium carbonate decomposes into calcium oxide and carbon dioxide upon heating. This is a chemical reaction stated in word. Now let us represent this chemical equation that's stated in word by symbols and formula. Now it becomes chemical equation. Calcium carbonate, CaCO3, the formula of calcium carbonate, decompose upon heating to calcium oxide plus carbon dioxide. This is chemical equation because it's represented by symbols and formula. Hydrogen plus oxygen produce water is a chemical equation because it's represented by symbols and formula. Now calcium carbon decompose into calcium oxide and carbon dioxide upon heating. This is a chemical equation because it is represented by symbols and formula. Therefore, chemical equation is the representative of chemical reaction by using symbols and formula is called a chemical equation. Let me repeat this important concept. Representing a chemical reaction using symbols and formulas is called chemical equation. Thank you.